It's been a long time, actually. I first got interested in Buddhism when I was in school, and I started meditating on my own using the book The Heart of Buddhist Meditation, which is a Theravadan explanation of mindfulness practice. This was when I was a freshman in college. And for the first couple of years, I practiced off and on. But then I started practicing every day, and the main benefit I felt was a certain sense of calmness and tranquility after I did the meditation. And then after I got out of college, I took refuge up in Woodstock, New York, where they have a center associated with the Karma Kagyu. The teacher there at the time was Kempo Kartar, who since is deceased. But so I took refuge, and then later I took Bodhisattva vows for the first time with Chogyam Trungpa. That was when I did a retreat up in Vermont. They have a center. I assume it's still there in what they called karma trolling. And so I practiced mainly on my own, but
Excuse me, Bernie, your camera
oh, my camera.
is slipping. Yes.
I need a new camera. I'm so disappointed because I paid so much money for this camera, and it keeps showing my belly button after a while. It sinks. Okay. So yeah, uh, I was doing my practice. Eventually, I started doing the Nundro practice, and after many years, I completed Nundro practice. Then I met uh, uh, I met a couple of people associated with the Tibetan Meditation Center who had a uh, a small group over the health food store at that time in Towson, which has since been torn down. So for a larger building, that's progress, I guess. And so I started practicing with them. Of course, they were slightly different tradition. I wore the Drikung Kagyu. And of course, that's off and on. And then uh, well, met many people, but I met you, I think, the first time up in the Tibetan Meditation Center, and we started practicing together at the Susquehanna Yoga Center. And for many years, we were doing a Sunday practice every week at the Susquehanna Yoga Center. And that's very briefly my background in all of this. So,
Well, very good. Thank you. Let me ask you, when you first were starting to meditate, you said you were in college. What was your age at that time?
of course, I was 18 years old when I started.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then when did you do the nunjo? When did you start doing the nunjo?
Oh, let's see. Nundro, I think I started doing in 80 something, I think. I can't remember the exact year. So it
So
was
what would you
several
say?
years
You were
after
about
I
50
started
or
taking refuge. And
or
it
you
took
about
me a long time. It took me 10 years to finish. 10 years to finish Nundro.
so
I was not
how
quick
old do you
about
think
it.
you were when you finished that?
It was I believe it was no, I couldn't have started back in the 80s because it took me 11 years. And I think I finished in 2001 or 2002. So I must have started around 19. No, I had to start before then because, geez, no, 1990, I guess I started doing the Nundro. It took me 11 years to finish. So I was not quick about it at all, but I was relatively consistent for the most part. So,
So you were about 40, 50 years old?
yeah, something like, let me see. In 2000, I would have been 50, 46, 46. So 47, 48. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, of course, the physically the hardest part is the frustrations, and I did them first, so I got them out of the way. Actually, doing the Vajrasattva was physically hard too because I insisted on doing them sitting in lotus posture. Probably a mistake, but my legs hurt so much by the time the 808 round was finished. I said, "Oh my God!" So anyway, but yeah, so yeah, it gets easier physically as you go on, but it gets harder mentally to keep track of the practice. The last part is, of course, is the Guru Yoga. At least the last part for me was the Guru Yoga. So they don't have five parts as in the Drikung Kagyu. So
Well, very good. Thank you very much. That's very good. And I hope maybe that's, to some degree inspiring to people, that even though we may be young, we may be middle aged, or we may be, seniors, there's still opportunity. And this is what we're concentrating on our Sunday program that we do is the Nundro. So we're going through it, slowly talking about it and so on. And for myself, it took me 12 years to do it, much the same as Bernie. And it was the single most important thing that I did in my Buddhist career, so to speak, to really come together and understand, what it is to be a Buddhist practitioner and what Buddhism means, what the Dharma means, and what Sangha means. So there's a lot of connection points by doing the Nundro. Thank you, Bernie.
okay, you're welcome.
Okay, so let's begin by doing our opening prayers, please. So I'll recite, starting on page 1 with the altruistic motivation. So please recite along with me, although keep your microphones muted, but speak in a forceful way, in a magnificent way, an elegant way. And don't worry if you don't have the pronunciation 100% correct with the Tibetan part, but it's through doing it, through the repetition of doing it and doing it with a group that you begin to get, the rhythm of it and the pronunciation. So no worries. So we begin with the altruistic motivation. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Dagla dang wa je pe dra no pa je pe ge. Tarpa dang tam she ken pe bar du jo par je pa tam she ki so je pe. Manam ka dam yam pe sem chen tam she de wa dang den. Dug now dang drel nor du la na me pa yang dag pa zog pe sang ju brin po she to pa ja. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Excuse me, I did the wrong. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Deshe du sang ma ge gi bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. Ma she bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. Du de ring ne song te ni ma sang ta sam gi bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. The Long Refuge Prayer. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and the lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the Yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the Yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. Transcend sawa dangur paje pe padan la madam panam la kapsuchio. Yidam kilgorgi la soknam la kapsuchio. Sange chom dende nam la kapsuchio. Dampe cho nam la kapsuchio. Pape ge dun nam la kapsuchio. Pawo ka jong cho kyong song me song yeshe gi chang dang den pa nam la kapsuchio. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Shang Shu Ning Po Chi Ki Bar Sangye Nam La Kapsu Chi Chodang Shang Shub Senpai Soklang Deshin Kapsu Chi Jitar Nongi Deshegi Shang Shub Tugni Ke Padang Shang Shub Senpai La Pala De Dagrim Shin Ne Patar De Shindro La Pendandu Shang Shub Samni Ki Gishing De Shindu Ni La Pala Rempa Shindu La Pajio. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki chodam la Shangju bardu dagni kapsuchi Dagi jinsoki pe sonamgi Drola penshir sange ju pasho. Four immeasurables. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Manam kadam yam pesem trentam she dewadang dewe kudang dempar jorchi. Dugnal dang danal gi gudang drawar jorchi. Dugnal me pe dewadang vidrawar jorchi. May ring jak dang ni dang drawe tang namla ne pa jorchi. The 100-syllable purification mantra of Vajrasattva will recite once in English and 3 times in the Sanskrit. Om Vajrasattva Samaya, help to protect my vow, to purify myself. May you remain firm with me. Grant me the complete satisfaction. Grow with me. Be loving towards me. Grant me the attainments to master the powers beyond body and nature. Show me all the deeds of body, speech, and mind. Make my mind, heart good, virtuous, and auspicious. Revel in the bliss of the 4 joys, O Blessed One, who embodies the essence within me. Do not abandon me. Grant me the realization of the indestructible nature. Make me one with you. Thus I signify my unity with non-duality. Ah. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopa Dristadredo Me Bhava Sutto Kayo Me Bhava Supo Kayo Me Bhava Anuraktu Me Bhava Sara Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sara Karma Sutsa Me Sitsan Shriya Kuru Hong Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Saratada Gata Vajra Mame Munsa Bajri Bhava Mahasamaya Sattvaha Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopa Dristadredo Me Bhava Sutto Kayo Me Bhava Supo Kayo Me Bhava Anuraktu Me Bhava Sara Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sara Karma Sutsa Me Sitsan Shriya Kuru Hong Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Saratada Gata Bajra Mame Munsa Bajri Bhava Mahasamaya Sattvaha Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopa Dristadredo Me Bhava Sutto Kayo Me Bhava Supo Kayo Me Bhava Anuraktu me bhava, sara siddhi me prayatsa, sara karma sitsa me, sitsantriya kuruham. Ha 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 ho bhagavan, Saratada gata bajra mame mansa bajri bhava mahasamaya satvaha. Last is the Sagarimati requested sutra in English. Likewise, be extinguished. Likewise, be extinguished. Extinguish all enemies to my purpose. Whatever evil forces are in me, be defeated. Do this so that when I am victorious, all pure radiance melts into me, completely purified. Take all this knowledge, food and drink peacefully, enjoy it, and be satisfied, so that all obstacles may be destroyed. Be liberated from all obstacles, all general obstacles. Maras are defeated by this gesture of the Buddhas. By reciting this mantra, may all the Maras be purified. As a result, may all the Maras be defeated. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the opening prayers or anything that we've talked about so far? Okay. Yes.
I had a question. You and Bernie both mentioned in Nungdro that it took like 10 or 11 years. Was that because that was the number of how long it took you to do the number of mala rounds
Well,
that were required in that practice? I'm not sure. Is it you have to do it for a certain number of days or for a certain number of recitations?
Well, the accumulation for each one of the 4 parts of the Nundro, there's 4 parts to it, and each one of the accumulations is 100,000. So recitations on the mala beads and so on. So there's different prayers or mantras that you're reciting to accumulate the 100,000. So it took me quite a while because that's quite a lot of work to do. And for my sake, and I think Bernie too, we were working full time at that time and had other responsibilities. So we were doing it at our own pace, and and that's how long it took. I know that it's the first thing that is generally done in the 3-year traditional retreat that is done by young men and women who are following the monastic life and so on. So in the old country, in India and Tibet. So it's the first part that's done. And it might take up to a whole year to complete those accumulations. So the first year of the 3-year retreat is the Nundro practice. Some may be able to do it quicker, some may take longer, but just to give you an idea of the time commitment there. Yes, Brendan.
Thank you for giving Bernie some opportunity to speak at the beginning of the Sangha meeting today. Ever since I had Chinese food with Bernie at the Empowerment at your house, Lance, I found him to have a fascinating perspective and a lot of wisdom. So I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Yes, he does. Yes. He's been my friend and my teacher many times. Yes. So we're talking about the Nundro. We're talking about the sutras on Monday nights. So and the purpose of this of doing the Nundro, doing the sutras, is to let the Buddhas teach, to let Buddha teach, because the wisdom of the Buddha is completely realized, is fully realized. And what we're doing is, we're just taking parts and pieces of it and so on and bringing it into our lives and then talking about it. This has been our experience and so on like that. And it's good experience, but to really let the Buddha teach is what the main purpose here is. So by by going in and looking at the sutras, reciting the sutras together, encouraging us to study the sutras on our own is really what the purpose of this is. So it's not something that we just do 2 hours, once a week. The encouragement is, what better books do you have to read? What better magazines do you have to read? What better television shows do you have better to watch, or sports or whatever, than something like this? And so by going through it the way we're going to go through it, I hope it captures your imagination to the point that you really want to understand, you want to learn more, you want to read more, because it's very compelling. It's the way that this has been translated by the 84,000 translation group is just really, really magnificent. And so that's the motivation to share this with you. Having said that, I want to screen share something very simple with you. Let me see if I can do this properly. Okay. Just a moment, I got to move some things around on my desktop here. Okay. So these are called the 4 reliances. So it's self-explanatory to some degree what we rely on. So as we are developing our Dharma knowledge, our Dharma awareness, our Dharma practice, and so on, we're first, we have teachers, people who are intermediaries between us and the actual teachings themselves and so on. And we need to be able to understand who they are and what they represent, so we need to not rely, I wrote reply here, we do not rely on the individual, we rely on the Dharma. So whatever the personality of the teacher is not near as important as what it is that the teacher is teaching, and that would be the Dharma. And the Dharma is the intellectualization, is the teaching of Buddha Shakyamuni, who lived 2,600 years ago. So we're not relying on the individual teacher, we're relying on the Dharma that they are teaching. And as we just went through a few minutes of reciting these motivational prayers, and when they're done with a heartfelt devotion, that what we are doing is we are kind of focusing our attention on our Buddha nature that is within each one of ourselves. And we're kind of, we're separating ourselves from the everyday noise, the everyday life, all the things that we encounter during our regular business day and so on. And we're reciting these prayers to really focus on what it is. So our motivation is to do this as purely as we can, but still we have personalities. And sometimes they leak into our conversations. So we should not rely on the individual, but rely on what the teachings that the individual is bringing to us, the Dharma. The second of the 4 reliances is do not rely on the words, rely on the meaning. In other words, we may be reciting these, and in the beginning, I've said many times that we should memorize these things. And the more that we become this becomes a memory for us, that we become the embodiment of it. And for us to be able to be the embodiment of it, for us to memorize it, we need to know the meaning of it. We learn the meaning. We kind of assimilate into the meaning of the words of each of these different prayers, each of these different practices, each of these different teachings. So we're not relying on the words themselves, we're relying on the meaning of the words. So we talk about that there's an outer meaning, there's an inner meaning, and there is a secret meaning. The outer meaning is just the words, what the words represent. We can look up the words in the dictionary and understand, what the coarse general meaning of these different terms and words are and so on. But then we learn through the Dharma that there is a inner meaning to many of these words and phrases. And so that we learn those and we begin to use those as a guide for our own experience. Our own experience leads to the secret meaning. That meaning that when we experience the realization that comes from our meditations, from our practices and so on, when we see it all coming together in a very, very meaningful, secret way that relates to us within our own heart center, within our own heart mind, that we rely on that. And this is something we call secret because we don't go around sharing it with people as if to try and impress them or to change their lives or something like that. We want to keep this to ourselves because we may find that what we believe the meaning is right now is likely to change in, say, a year from now. That our different viewpoint, as we progress along the path, we begin to see that there are these thresholds that we cross over and over and over again. And so we want to keep this to ourselves because we may confuse other people. The people that we can talk about these things, the meaning, is our brothers and sisters in the Sangha. We feel that we have a relationship with them. We can talk about it with them. We can talk about it with our teachers, those who have brought these Dharma teachings to us. We can share these experiences that we have with them. But we shouldn't go around talking to ordinary people as a means of being able to try and change their lives or help them or something like that, unless we become quite confident in what it is that we're doing, and we've had the approval of our teachers and our friends. So the third of the four reliances is do not rely on the apparent meaning, rely on the certain meaning. So this goes to what I was just saying, that whatever seems apparent right now, in time may change through our different experience and so on. So we need to be able to relate to these experiences that we have in terms of a progression. And they should be saying, well, as I see it now, as I recognize it now, this is what I think about this, that, or the other thing. But it's always keeping your mind open that things may change, that we may cross another threshold and see things from yet another point of view. So from the point of view of an ordinary person, the point of view of a practitioner, the point of view of a yogi or a yogini, the point of view of a bodhisattva, and then from the point of view of a Buddha. So to rely on the certain meaning rather than the apparent meaning. So we know that, we as human beings are in a impermanent state. And so we have to be able to abide with that impermanence and not feel as though that we have absolute knowledge of all these things and I can talk about this absolute knowledge. And then the fourth is do not rely on consciousness. Rely on primordial wisdom. So do not rely on the consciousness means our intellect. We recognize, we see, we hear, we think, we taste, we go through all these things of processing our consciousness and so on. But it's all within our brain. It's all within our head. It's all within our memory. It's all colored by our ego. It's all tainted by our experiences and so on. And they can corrupt. They can contaminate what might be good things. So we have to be wary of that. We have to be careful with that. We need to rely on the primordial wisdom. What is the primordial wisdom? The primordial wisdom is that transcendent experience that we have as we develop our comprehension, as we develop our concentration, as we develop our contemplation, and as all that gives way to our meditation. And the meditation, the true sense of the meditation, is that it is transcendent beyond our consciousness, our ordinary consciousness. And we don't realize it until after we have that meditative primordial experience. And then we kind of come back into our ordinary body, so to speak. And then we say, oh my goodness, I just spent, 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 30 seconds or an hour or a weekend or something in that state of mind. And then you start to try and recount it in your consciousness. You try and, be able to give it some explanation to yourself or to other people and so on. And as we do that, we begin to corrupt some of that primordial wisdom that we might have misinterpreted or something. So the true primordial wisdom is speechless. It's effortless. There might be a sense of love, a sense of compassion as we begin to recollect what that was. But that's a conscious way of being able to look at it. So we need to rely on that primordial transcendent wisdom to develop the meditation. The meditation is that key that fits into the lock that opens up our intellectual mind and our physical body. So these are the 4 reliances. So maybe you had a chance to write these down while I was talking and reflect on this from time to time. I've got this written, in several different places where I sit and I read and do my work and so on like that. And from time to time, I notice it and I sit for a few minutes and I think about this and say, wow, how true this is and how meaningful this has become and how much I actually do practice these 4 reliances. So I hope that helps to some degree. Does anybody have any comments or questions about this? Any discussion?
I just want to say they're definitely stretch goals for me. I consider them to be stretch goals.
What kind of goals?
Stretch goals. Like that's what you're aiming for.
Stretching?
Yeah, a stretch goal is something that you have to put in a lot of effort to achieve.
Yes.
So it's that's also why I find these things good, because however good I might possibly be, there's so much more.
Very good. Yes. Thank you very much.
And thank you for sharing. I think I heard about more like at least 2 reliances, but somehow in my memory I didn't know about the other 2. And I just wonder if there are any other form that they explain this, especially the last one, or is that pretty much like standard line for the reliance?
Well, this is something that I've found in the Journament of Liberation and the sutras and in other texts. So it may be in the glossaries that we have, and that's the next thing I wanted to get to. It may be in these glossaries that are in these sutra books that I'm presenting to you. So to use these reference books or to simply, Google has really gotten excellent, has gotten very good. Wikipedia and Wikipedia has gotten really, really terrific. So just putting in the 4 reliances and see what comes up could be very, very good for you. So for anybody. So that's been a go-to now, because you always got your phone with you, and you can always Google something real quick. So, and it may lead to many other things. So I would encourage people to do that as well.
And I'm just out of just pure um uh is that something specific to Kagyu tradition, or all traditions have these 4 reliances?
Oh, I think it's all traditions.
Okay,
Barney,
fine.
would you like to speak to that? Do you have any comment on that?
No, not that I want to question them. I actually like them, so I'm
Okay.
you know,
All right. Well, very
it's,
good.
it's,
Well, you see, it
Heard-
becomes so
I've
that
only
becomes
heard the
food for your
teaching.
research.
I've
Yeah.
only heard the teaching from Tibetan Buddhist teachers. I cannot say where the 4 reliances originally came from. I mean, what their source is. Often their source is in the Mahayana, but I don't know where the sources. I would have to research that. I've certainly heard teachings on this at Tibetan Meditation Center, but I do not know the original source of the teaching. Let's see, references. And yeah, I was looking
Yeah, I
it up
found
here on
it.
my phone.
I found the sutra, and it's Katu Pratisarana.
Oh yeah, it's right here. Chatu, which is 4, Prati Sarana
is-
Sutra. Prati Sarana. I do not know the meaning
Mhm.
of the Sanskrit word Prati Sarana, but Chatu means 4. I guess it means the 4 reliances sutra. That would just be a guess, but it says it's a sutra from the Sanskrit tradition, so it comes from a sutra, which I've never read. But so
just
it's a
Yeah.
teaching from the sutra.
Pratisana means reliable in Sanskrit.
Mm.
Yeah. So the 4 reliances sutra is essentially what it means. So
it to me it's like just like in physics.
It's like a what?
It's like in physics we say that we first thing we trust is experiment, and second thing we trust is theory, equation, and all that. But yeah, primordial wisdom is kind of like experiment that we do inside of ourselves, and just see, okay, what it is as it is, and then we try to do elaboration, what it may mean and all that. But yeah, my thing is what we're able to witness ourselves
Okay, very good. Thank you.
as a
All right.
Lance?
Yes.
Yeah, I got a comment here. First of all, I find it seems so simple. These 4 sentences. Ridiculous. But the value to me is that they describe in so few words what I know to be true. But what's more important than that is that it helps me to know what I know. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
That to me embodies the practice of my Buddhist thought. And I'm very pleased to be here for that.
Very good. Yes. When you say is it a vicarious knowing?
No,
Or
it
is
is.
it an actual knowing?
I live in a world, and maybe others do too, where I know this, I know that, blah, blah, blah. But to know what you know is a different state of being. To know what you know. I can't put it in other words, but that to me is epitomized by what I just read in these 4 sentences.
Yeah, there's often the metaphor that is always talked about is, you talk about meditation, you talk about experience, as a result of meditation and practice and so on, and you tell somebody about it, and you tell them over and over and over again, and they say, "Oh yeah, I think I know, I got it, yeah." But then it's like giving somebody a sugar cube, a cube of sugar, and telling them what sweet is. Well, sweet is like this, sweet is like that. Meditation is like this, meditation is like that. Love is like this, love is like that. But until you take the sugar cube and put it in your mouth and taste that sweetness, you say, "Oh, that's what it is. Now I got it."
I think this is a good night for me. I'm happy to be here.
Good. I'm glad you're here. Okay. So unless there's another comment, I want to switch to the play in full. So I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction to, there's actually 4 books that are part of the play in full. It's 500 some pages. So I chose to take the first 10 chapters and make that into one book. And then the last book is mostly the glossary, page 404, or book 404 is mostly the glossary, but it also has the bibliography, and it has notes that are footnotes that are throughout the other 3 books that are all compiled into this one book. And the colophon is defined as the summation of where this comes from. It's like the authenticity of the author, the colophon. This is where this came from. This is why I am doing it. And so it's kind of like that. It's usually very short, the colophon, and comes after the whole dissertation or the whole book that's been written and so on like that. So this book 404 are those parts right there. So the glossary, to me, may be the most valuable, or at least one of the most valuable assets of these sutras that was put together by 84,000. Of course, the glossary wasn't in the sutras themselves, but the translators said, well, let's take these words out and put them into a glossary form so that people can reference what these mean and so on. So there is a standard of reference of understanding what these words and phrases are. So this should be your go-to. And each one of these sutras, and there's over 100 sutras, each one of them has their own glossary. And there's going to be a lot of words that are going to be found in all the glossaries and so on, but there's going to be some that are going to be unique to a particular sutra. So it's the kind of thing that somebody like me could spend a whole afternoon just going through the glossary, reading one thing, going to another, reading something else, and so on like that. So I find this to be an invaluable tool, the glossary. So we're going to refer to a couple things in a couple minutes just to help make this point. The play in full, the first book, book 1, the first part is broken down into, if you look at the cover, it says that it's TOH, it is the Tibetan Kangyur text number 95. And included in here is the summary of the whole play in full, are the acknowledgments that the author and the translators make, which is quite short. And then there is an introduction that, depending on the translators, how much introduction they give. In this part here, they give quite a bit. It might be several pages of introduction for each one of the chapters. These introductions may be about the subject matter of what the chapter is. It may be about who the different spiritual beings that were involved in this. And all these names may be listed and so on. And there may be a chronology, an explanation of the chronology, how these translations came about, how they were passed down. Because these are fairly recent translations into English from the Tibetan Kangyur. The Tibetan Kangyur is the collection of these sutras. And these sutras were first written down about 200 years or so, or they began to be written down about 200 years or so after Buddha Shakyamuni passed away. And before that, the teachings of the Buddha were committed to memory by his best disciples and all those that were around and so on. And they had several what they would call councils, where every 20 years or so they would come together and they would talk about the teachings of the Buddha, and they would kind of agree on, well, this is what the Buddha said. Because one disciple would hear it this way, another disciple might hear it another way, and then they would have discussion about it and say, well, I think we can all agree that it means this. And so this is what, as the Pali language got developed, and Bernie can talk much more about this than I can, but as the Pali language got developed, it became the language, the scripture of record. The Sanskrit was the language in which the Buddha was teaching, but there was no written language. It was an oral language. And it wasn't until the Pali, which came out of India, was it began to be written down. And then some of those books, some of those teachings, some of those disciples went on into the Far East and went into China and so on. And so some of the translations were done in Chinese. So Bernie, would you like to speak about this for a minute, just to clarify these points? If I spoke wrong or something you can embellish.
Okay.
And fix your camera, please.
The history of Sanskrit is a little bit complicated.
And fix your camera, please.
Oh, my camera again. I'm sorry. The history of Sanskrit is a little bit complicated. The first period of Sanskrit is the so-called Vedic Sanskrit. And Vedic Sanskrit is the language in which, of course, the Vedas were written, and
which were the Hindu scriptures.
The earliest Hindu scriptures. The Vedas are the earliest Hindu scriptures. And out of that developed a variety of dialects of Sanskrit, which differed from it in various ways in the different parts of India. Now, one of these dialects was Pali. Now, in the Theravadan tradition, they will tell you that Pali is the language that Buddha actually spoke. I believe that Western scholars do not agree with it. They say he spoke one of the dialects, but probably not Pali, and this is from internal evidence in the texts. But there were many different dialects, and it's really not that important which he spoke, but none of them were what we call classical Sanskrit. From that, from that developed the Pali scriptures in the Theravadan tradition, which is one of the dialects of what they call the middle period of Sanskrit. And it differs from Sanskrit in a couple of ways, but it's pretty close, actually. I can't really tell you all the differences. If you look at them, they are related, but somewhat different. You can see different translations of words, and you can see that they're related, but somewhat different. Out of that, you develop a Sanskrit translations, which were not the original speech by the Buddha. And what you have is what's known as Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit. Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit is because they wanted to preserve the meter of the verse parts of the scripture. They left this, they did Sanskrit, but they maintained a little bit of the middle period of Sanskrit, and it wasn't exactly translated into classical Sanskrit. And so you have a lot of most of the Mahayana texts were written down in Sanskrit, a combination of Sanskrit and what they call Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit. And from that, they were translated into the different languages of Asia, Chinese, and much later into Tibetan. So those are the two main alternative languages that the Buddhist scriptures have been translated into. There are other languages. There were languages of Central Asia, such as was a language called Khotanese, which is really a dialect of Sanskrit, but there's no complete collection of sutras in that particular language. So, is that enough, or is that too much for everybody?
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So if we can open up the book 1 of, and we see that the title is in English called The Play in Full, and in the Sanskrit, or in the Sanskrit, it is the Lalitavistara. Lalitavistara. So, maybe you get a little bit familiar with that. It's a beautiful sound. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. Lalitavistara. And you break it down in syllables. The thing that with the Sanskrit, what I've discovered is, it's a collection of many small syllables, usually no more than 4 characters, mostly 2 characters or 3 characters, digits within a Sanskrit word, but then it's all them brought together. So Lalitavistara translates into English as the play in full. So this is basically the life story of the Buddha. Yes, Kunga.
So this is the same sutra that's mentioned in the deity yoga practice, or for the first one for Shakyamuni Buddha, it talks about in the last page, says diligently apply yourself to this practice as much as you can. In between sessions, practice mandala offerings, recite to the best of your ability, and then it lists this as one of the sutras. So it's the same one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so this is a foundational sutra. This is one of the most important. So if we go to the table of contents, we can see that there's almost 2 whole pages of the table of contents. These 27 chapters are all listed here. So it's broken down very, very easily for us to be able to look for things. And of course, you can make notes in this book. I suggest that you do as you go along. And if you want a pristine copy, we can certainly arrange that for you. But I would encourage you to make pencil notes in here, because nobody can remember it all, that's for sure. And you're going to need reference points that you can jot down in your own handwriting, and you'll come to appreciate. So I'm just pointing these features of the book out to you. So the table of contents, then we come to this summary. So now, Kunga, would you read the summary to us out loud, please?
Yes. The play in full tells the story of how the Buddha manifested in this world and attained awakening as perceived from the perspective of the great vehicle. The sutra, which is structured in 27 chapters, first presents the events surrounding the Buddha's birth, childhood, and adolescence in the royal palace of his father, king of the Sakyas nation. It then recounts his escape from the palace and the years of hardship he faced in his quest for spiritual awakening. Finally, the sutra reveals his complete victory over the demon Mara, his attainment of awakening under the Bodhi tree, his first turning of the wheel of Dharma, and the formation of the very early Sangha.
Very good. Thank you. So you can see that this is a very formative sutra. This is a very formative story that is the basis of so many other things that we know about the Buddha that we've come to recognize. This is a base repository of teaching and so on. If we go to the introduction, which is 2 pages later, and just that first paragraph, 1.1 or maybe 1.2, gives a little bit more. So I'll read that. It says, the play in full, Lalitavistara, is without a doubt one of the most important sutras within Buddhist Mahayana literature, with parts of the text dating from the earliest days of the Buddhist tradition. This story of the Buddha's awakening has captivated the minds of devotees, both ordained and lay, as far back as the beginning of the Common Era. The next paragraph says, in brief, the play in full tells the story of how the Buddha manifested in this world and attained awakening. The sutra, which is structured in 27 chapters, begins with the Buddha being requested to teach the sutra by several gods, as well as the thousands of bodhisattvas and hearers in his retinue. And then it goes on to say the gods summarize the sutra in the following manner. So this calls into a lot of question our preconceived ideas of what spirituality is, what Buddhism is, and what gods are. That they would be requesting the Buddha to have this life, to come to this world in the very first place. So in order to help us to understand this, let's turn to the glossary now in book 4 of 4 and go to the page, it's alphabetical, go to the page of God, G-O-D. It's listed as G.213. So does everybody have that? Okay.
G.213, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody got it? Okay. So we're going through a practical exercise of how to use this book, how to use the sutra, how to use the glossary, etc. So let's try and clarify what the Buddhists think about God. When they use the word God, what is their definition of God? So here is something maybe that this is going to help us. So Debbie, would you mind reading this out loud for us all?
Sure. All right, God. My eyes are a little bit teary today, so I can read Deva Putra, but I cannot pronounce the first one. All right, so cognate with the English term divine, the Devas are most generally a class of celestial beings who frequently appear in Buddhist texts, often at the head of the assemblies of non-human beings who attend and celebrate the teachings of Shakyamuni and other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In Buddhist cosmology, the Devas occupy the highest of the 5 or 6 destinies, gati, of samsara, among which beings take rebirth. The Devas reside in the Devalokas, heavens, that traditionally number between 26 and 28, and are divided between the desire realm, which is Kamadhatu, material realm, Rupadhatu, and immaterial realm, Drupayatu.
Arupa Dhatu.
Yeah, I think my eyes are tearing because there's something in them. A being attains rebirth among the devas either through meritorious deeds in the desire realm or the attainment of subtle meditative states in the material and immaterial realms, which I guess are the form and formless realms. While rebirth among the devas is considered favorable, it is ultimately a transitory state from which beings will fall when the conditions that lead to rebirth there are exhausted. Thus, rebirth in the God realm is regarded as a diversion from the spiritual path. That's logical.
So this has a very interesting element to it, and something worthy of coming back to over and over and over again as we understand things and as we process it with our preconception of what we think God is, what we, from the time that we've been little children, that we've been hearing about God and what God is, whether God doesn't really exist or God exists in some different form, or God is in heaven, God is omnipotent, God is the creator of all things, or something like that. So here, this is saying that God is, forgive me if I'm not saying it correct, but is a precursor, or can be a diversion from attaining Buddhahood, from attaining Buddha awakeness, awareness, and so on. So it's said here that in the middle of this paragraph, it said in Buddhist cosmology, the devas, deva is the Sanskrit word for gods, the devas occupy the highest of the 5 or 6 destinies, the gatis of samsara, among which beings take rebirth. So if you remember a year ago when we were doing Buddhism 101, and we've done it many times, but most recently then, was we talked about the 6 human realms. And the God realm was the top of that. Human beings behaving, thinking, being reborn in this realm of what they appear as being superior, as being divine. And so, but these are human beings that are thinking this, or realizing this, and so on. And that they can get caught up in that, and that becomes an ego trap. We become attached to that. Or we can have aversion to those that think that. It can propagate, many different emotions as a result of that. So the gods are inhabiting this realm. These are human beings who are thinking that they are, behaving that they are at this superhuman level, while at the same time they remain human beings. So what do you think about that? Let's talk about that for a minute. Let's share some thoughts, because I know this may fly in the face of people who have the sense of a Christian God, a Hebrew God, an Islamic God, a Hindu God, and so on. What does this mean to you? Somebody like to begin? Brian? Brendan?
Well, I'm going to get very speculative here, but it almost makes me wonder if perhaps some of these other gods, including the Christian God, is not quite what Christians think he is. Does that make sense? And perhaps more in a Buddhist sense, he's something else, but I'm getting very speculative here. My other question is, it says, thus rebirth in the God realms is regarded as a diversion from the spiritual path. So if I were to be reborn as a God, but not a Bodhisattva or a Buddha, would that be an improvement on my current situation in the human realm? That's what occurs to me. That's my question.
Okay, that's good. We'll come back to that.
Well, I was going to say, the way it's supposed to work from what I've read is that, yes, your life is very long. It is very good. You struggle for nothing. However, what you also don't do is study the Dharma. And so that's the pitfall of being born in the God realm. That when you do die, not only is it a shock because you have this very long lifespan, but then you're not prepared for your death. And so it's very easy for you to fall into a lower rebirth.
Mm. Thank you, Debbie. So it would not be an improvement. It would be illusory. It would be fool's gold, so to speak. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I would not want, I would not.
Is a state of mind of a human being. Would somebody else like to make a comment? Vic,
Yeah, I would like to make a comment.
Yeah, please.
So it reminds me of the compassion visualization where we visualize our mother in the six realms. You know, we would visualize our mother in the realm of the gods. And when I did that visualization, I think, you know, well, she has all the wealth and material wealth and psychological health that she could want, but yet she's, because of her pride in having that, she forgets that she has the ability to share that with others. You know, that compassion element is missing. And when I think about the God realm, I think about it in that way, that people have all this wealth, all these treasures available to them, but they're completely self-centered. They don't realize that those things are there they don't realize their interconnection with everyone else. So they enjoy it while they have it, but then eventually they do die, and you know, and eventually they, you know, that's they don't make what they could of that birth, right? And the idea is that you're so over. Well, I guess I think of people wealthy. You know, some people are wealthy. It seems like they're real bodhisattvas. You know, they're using their wealth to help others, setting up these organizations and things like that. Where others people, it seems like they just use their wealth to build mansions and, you know, buy, you know, $1 million purses, and so you wonder, well, what's going on there. So thank you.
Thank you. Vic, I think you wanted to say something before, please.
Definitely. I think that it a question that comes to mind for me is like when visiting Buddhist countries, like you would see people making offerings to like devas, and if they're like not, I guess, you know, because I do have like a Hindu background and now I'm learning about Buddhism. So in Hinduism, you give these offerings because these gods are all powerful, but obviously in Buddhism, they're not all powerful. So it makes me wonder like why people in Buddhist countries do like petition the devas and stuff. That's just something that came to mind. But I do think that the concept of like you can become a Buddha or you can become a deva, to me, I find that really like liberating because it really shows that your future is just completely in your own hands and you can become a god or you can become something even greater than a god, which I think is a really optimistic and awesome concept.
That's very good. Thank you.
Can I say something about that, Lance?
Sure, please.
So, Vic, I think in the Buddhist view of the gods, even though they're not like all powerful, they are very powerful and long lived. They live, you know, they could live for a kalpa, and it's good to be friends with them. You know, they could help you out, and so people make offerings and things like that. Also, sometimes there's in the tantric histories, there's considered that some of these gods actually kind of became Buddhist, that they actually become bodhisattvas in their form of Indra or Shiva and so forth, and work for the benefit of beings. That's just something that is a little sidetrack on that.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Would you think that, you know, I think a traditional Western way, in the Western traditions, we're taught to think that God is the creator, that in 7 days, God created, you know, the universe, created this world, etc., and so on. How does that fit into this description of God?
It doesn't, to me. It's completely different. These are gods with a little g. And the Christian or Jewish conception of God is, to me, extraordinarily different. Although what Tashi was saying in terms of, these how powerful they are and how they live for a long time, to me, this is kind of similar to certain Catholic saints and Christianity, that you can, you pray through them because they can help you out, because they have some kind of a, I don't know, a line to God, so to speak.
Okay, so let's look now at the definition of Buddha. So in your glossary, go to G.95 in your book, in your glossary here, and there's the definition of Buddha. So Matthew, would you read that, please?
Sure. The Indic term Buddha is used in Buddhism as an epithet for fully awakened beings in general, and more specifically often refers to the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha Shakyamuni. The term Buddha is the past participle of the Sanskrit root Bud, which meaning to awaken, to understand, or to become aware. Sometimes also translated here as awakened one.
Okay, thank you. So would anybody like to comment if you think that the Buddha is a supernatural being? Something beyond being a human being? Tashi, did you turn your microphone on?
Yeah, it's on, I think. I mean, yeah. So I view the Buddha as both a human being when he was walking around, which he's not doing right now after the parinirvana, and also as a completely omniscient, awakened one. So I think that any human being or any living being can become an omniscient, awakened one through the path, and that potential is always there.
So there's more than one Buddha?
I think there's infinite Buddhas.
Okay.
Can I jump in for just a little bit?
Please, yeah.
Going back to the term God as well as the term Buddha, the concept. Hindu philosophy looked at the universe as actually older than it is. They, when they talk about God, they're not just, and they're talking about realms, they're not just talking about Earth and human beings. Their philosophy has this incredible timeline where there's multiple worlds. And we're in a universe that has trillions of inhabitable planets. And so they also knew that, universes are created and they're destroyed. And, what we're seeing in physics and cosmology is we have multiple universes, an infinite array of universes. We don't know how all this stacks up. But it's like we're in a bubble and there's these other bubbles. So when they're looking at terms like gods, they're seeing something that is very different from the Western concept of reality. That's why it's a small g. And that's also that when they'll talk about kalpas, which are eons. And again, billions of years, trillions of years, there's no timeline. They just know it's a huge amount of time. And they see that in some places and sometimes there's one Buddha or there's many. We're supposed to, I think, have 1,000, or maybe, there's none. And this also kind of squares with the universe being kind of random. It's like the experiment starts running and the universe goes off and does what it does. And that's the physical part of the universe. The Dharmakaya is, ultimately we know these universes are just a play of the Dharmakaya. But I think when we're looking at these two terms, we need that extra context. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense.
So you said something very interesting in that you said that we got all these universes, got all this multi-universe, got all this stuff happening, all this stuff that we don't know about. I'm paraphrasing you now, that we don't know about. Now, is that something that you can relate to the Buddha? That this is what the Buddha, does the Buddha, Tashi said the Buddha is omniscient, meaning all knowing. So does the Buddha realize that as a human being, there are limitations to what we can know?
Oh, yes, definitely. That's why we're sitting here completely ignorant, and we are Buddha. We've never let that stay.
So,
but because we've been pushed down into this universe, into these beings, on this planet at this time, everything we see is limited.
but then that begs the question: is the Buddha himself, is this concept of Buddha, is that supernatural, or is that just the state of being a human being?
No, I don't. It's neither. Okay, if we look at a bodhisattva like Padmasambhava, he is talked about as having a certain level of realization. He's in samba enjoyment body form, right? Kempo Samdu talks about realization there's two elements of it. That there's a selflessness of self, and that is the first. Like Shiraka Pratyeka, they have that selflessness of self and realize it. And the second level is selflessness of phenomena. Everything. I think that when I am a Buddha, I will understand how everything works. I'm inseparable from it, but in this form, I will never have a complete understanding. Because we're so tiny, we're just this little blip. And our abilities are so tiny. And I think that's it. I think to rebirth, as you're going on this path, you become more, you become more and more aware. And then when Buddha Shakyamuni died, he had a level of realization that we don't know what it is. But when he died, it is very likely he is a Buddha, like gets all of it. I don't know what kind of a thought or a mind stream or a consciousness he would possibly have. But I don't see him as supernatural at all. Actually, that's what natural is, I think.
Well, what does anybody think about, we talk about our dualistic nature. And if we get down to the very, 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 lowest common denominator of what this dualism is, can we say that there is this matter, there is solids, there are these atoms and the subatomic atom particles that are what we call atoms and so on. But in between all those subatomic particles is all this, what we call energy. And it's said now, by many scientific people and everything, that there is this shifting, if you will, of going between an energy wave and a particle solid. There's this moving back and forth, the state of flux all the time that permeates all things, that we appear as being solid, but meanwhile, what we are is mostly just that space, just that flux. And can we, try and understand it by ascribing a concept of spirituality into that, saying, well, that's our spiritual nature. That's our true nature. And the Buddha is aware of that. The Buddha is awakened to that. And the Buddha abides in that without any like or dislike. It just is. Anybody want to comment about that?
Well, I mean, I think we're just trying to define the undefinable. So you can change it to saying space between atoms, but you're still trying to define something you can't define. I think the whole point is you can't define it. So I think that I don't like that trajectory where we just use science to try and say, oh, we can define it sort of unscientifically, but I don't think that's the point. I don't think we should be trying to figure out new concepts. I think the problems are the concepts.
So what are we looking? So what are we looking at? Are we looking at the spirituality of it?
There's no separation between science and spirituality. It's just a tool. They're
All
tools.
right, well, I'm asking Kunga. Okay, well, Kunga, what do you think? If it's not the science, are we looking at the spirituality?
I mean, we're using those labels. I guess I'd rather use the spirituality label than the science label. I think the spirituality label has fewer boundaries, and it doesn't. I don't confuse it. You know, with the science label, I'm thinking how things work. You know, and I'm trying to figure out how things work and how things go together. And with the spirituality label, I'm a lot more open to just discovering what is going on, and then I'm more open to learning, I guess. And one seems to be about learning, and one seems to be about making up rules and guides to understand how things work. So, you know, just science is just a different theory, I guess.
Okay. So what I'm trying to get to, and I want to ask Alex this question because he is a neuroscientist, and I'd like to get his point of view on this. But the thing that we're really trying to do is to look at these sutras as looking at this conundrum, if you will, in these terms, in these spiritual Buddhist Dharma terms. It is a system by which to try and balance ourselves to not be attached or not to have aversion, to let go of our dualism, and to come to the point of saying, look, we're human beings, and one of our biggest faults is that we think we can know all this stuff. You know, rather than abiding in that space in between, that, you know, is it in a state of flux or not? But well, who cares? But we just see it as love. In its purest essence, we see it as love. So, Alex, what would you have to comment about this?
I think we're still talking about different beings, like in God's realms, right?
As what?
We're still talking about the first paragraph.
Yes.
About the God's realm.
Well, we're talking about gods and Buddhas and space and energy and all that.
So I think first we can take a note that this God is from small first letter. It's not capital God. So
what would capital God be?
Yes, it's not the creator of the universe. It's the gods that kind of occupy the universe as one of the advanced beings, but but not the ultimate beings, from what I see. And now speaking, this is more linguistical aspect of that, but from point of view of like physics, to me, there are so much unexplored in terms of states of matter and life, forms of life, that it's kind of amazing how many different stars out there, like neutron stars, magnetic stars, whatnot. I mean, white dwarfs, red giants, and like even look at the sun. What happens on the sun? Like we can never predict. It's like life on its own. There is all this, in the plasma. Plasma as complicated as we are here in biological world. Like it's just a different level of state of matter, and all these laws are like very complicated. We can't like.
Well, let me ask this question. Let me ask it this way: when you collectively or individually, when you are happy, what's your state of mind? What's your state of body? What is your state being a human being when you're happy?
I would say it's light.
Yeah, it's it's pouring. To me, it's pouring, like something is coming out of you.
So there's
energy
a you.
Comes out of you, maybe.
Okay. So there's a you, and you're radiating.
Yeah, something.
Kashi, what would you say?
Yeah, I think you could say there's you and it's rating. It's always changing, though. There's no fixed self. It's a process. There's a process of radiation. It's like a river. Where is the river? Is it the bank? No, that's earth. Is it the water? That's just water. But when you have the river flowing through the banks, you got a river. The human being, I think, is like that. And there are different like energies that come from a person when they're in different states. I think if you're sad, it could be very heavy. If you're happy, it could be very light and radiant.
Would you see the Buddha, as we know the Buddha, as we've heard the definition and so on so far, is there an ego associated with the Buddha?
No,
What was that?
no ego. That's one of the things that
William, we can hear you. A voice from space.
surprise. I have a thought that I've been mulling over all evening long. It's like the Buddha, when he was enlightened, is probably like some of the people coming out of high school.
Coming out of high school?
Correct. Now, in the last 25,000 years, or is it 2,500 years? Last 2,500 years, the Buddhists have continually added on and rethought all of their thinking and changed it to what they do right, the way they think right now. And I think in another 25 years or so, they're going to redo a lot of things, and the things in between point A and point B are going to be hashed a little bit more, because I think our societies are going to grow kind of exponentially. You know, we took until the latter 30s or so, and we got where we were making clothes on machines, and now we're going into space. So our concepts, our ideas, and all of that had changed considerably from what they were when they were out chasing what they called the wild Indians.
So is that Buddha? That change?
On the one hand. On the other hand, the human psyche, I don't know how much has actually changed. I think that back then, we felt compassion, we felt pain, we felt anger, the same way pretty much as we do right now. So the things that the Buddha was teaching were along the lines of compassion and anger and this type of thing, as opposed to rockets.
Okay.
And
So let me ask it this way now. So the first question was, does Buddha have ego? Then on the other side of that, does God, either with a capital G or a lowercase g, does God have ego?
Can I say something, Lance?
Sure.
I think the difference between Buddhism and the God type faiths is that in Buddhism, the nature of the Buddha's mind is no different than the nature of all of our minds. And the nature of all our minds is no different than the nature of all the Buddha's minds. That at that level, it's all the same, which is different than in the Abrahamic faith, where you have God's this like separate kind of being who creates all his servants or whatever, you know. This is more like we have that divine nature. It's just a matter of waking up to it and realizing it. And what the Buddha has done is realized that nature of mind.
And so where do we stand with that as ordinary human beings? Are we on the threshold of becoming Buddha? Are we already Buddha? You know, how would you describe that?
I would say we have a very precious opportunity to develop our minds to realize the Buddha nature as humans. That's a key Buddhist teaching.
Anybody else have a comment about that?
Yeah, if I may, if we put it in, I agree what was just said, and maybe in another way we could say we have opportunity to remember who we really are. So like our nature, inner nature, just like elementary particle, it always remained the same, but you know, we're gonna be made out of the same stuff today or tomorrow, but in terms of real, like when we reflect on ourselves, we can kind of remember what is our true nature, as opposed to being driven by illusions which is just stuff that we made up ourselves, and somebody helped us made up stuff along the way. We have opportunity to discover that true nature and become like Buddha.
Do we see within ourselves somewhere, somehow, that there is this connection with each other, all things, all nature, and so on? And do we regard that as being godlike? Do we regard it as being something else? Do we have a word for that? And what kind of a how does it make you? Any word I use is going to be too restrictive, I'm afraid. But I'm trying to get to, the point of not having any feeling, of not having any emotion. What gets you to that? Can you recognize that within yourself? Do you have a moment where you've had that experience?
So, from my understanding, please speak up, anyone else who would like to. One of the illusions that we have is the illusion of disconnection, of separatedness. One of
the illusion of what? I'm sorry, say that again.
The illusion of separateness, or being disconnected. So it appears that we are separate and disconnected. In reality, we are intimately connected and constantly exchanging energy and matter with our surrounding, right?
So what's what is the medium?
So whatever the medium can be, even empty space. The medium can be air or internet, that we right now connect to each other through, radio waves or wires.
Or mind.
Yeah. But ultimately it comes to our mind. Yes. I think it reaches to our mind.
So the point of my asking these questions and trying to keep this discussion going is to get us thinking about these things and in a form, in a format, in a structure. And this is what I think the Buddha has done. This is what the Dharma is. This is what the sutras are. It's giving us a system to be able to develop our mind as that is the device in which we are, thinking about all these things, that we're processing all these things, and so on like that. So, all these answers are right at one level, but at another level, all these answers, nothing is true. Nothing makes sense. At one level, it's all true. At one level, it's not true. And to be able to learn to be able to accept that and to be able to work with that. The wisdom might be to say, okay, I recognize all these things as being true. I recognize them being not true. Now, the application of that wisdom is the compassion. Well, how do I deal with that now? Because some people, that would drive us crazy. It is something, it's not something. That dichotomy would just drive us completely nuts. So the compassion is to be able to find a way to abide in that nebulous place, that space, or whatever you want to call it, the samadhi, the mind of the Buddha, and does the mind of God, the concept of God, in whatever tradition we look at, does it offer us that? Is that the way God is given to us in all the godlike scriptures and so on? Is it given to us that way?
No. And I'll tell you why, and I'm going to perhaps offend a few people tonight, and I'll certainly offend maybe someone watching this on YouTube. Tashi,
Yeah.
you talked about the Abrahamic faiths.
Yeah.
Alan Watts calls them the jealous God faiths, because
In
I am a
Buddhism.
jealous God. And Lance, you asked if God had an ego, and if you read the Old Testament, and if you believe that the Old Testament is truly writing about Yahweh, then he is tremendously full of ego, that Old Testament God. Whereas the Buddha is not. We are all spiritually interconnected. We believe we are different. Brendan, Lance, Kunga. But we are the same entity. We are the same consciousness. The Buddha is not responsible for the evil that befalls people. Nobody at Auschwitz has to ask the Buddha to beg for forgiveness, because the Buddha is not all powerful. It is not the Buddha's fault. So if you believe in an all powerful Old Testament God, then every single time a child is abused, that Old Testament God is allowing that to happen. So
Thank you. Yes. So is this conversation, we got to draw it to a close here pretty soon. So is this conversation like a whirlpool, a spiral that's pulling us down? Or is this conversation more like an upward spiral that's lifting us up? Are there more possibilities that are dragging us down to the depths, or are there more possibilities that are lifting us up to peace? Whereas the peace at the bottom of the vortex of the whirlpool.
I think it depends on whether or not we focus on Buddhism or other faiths. I think the more we talk about our negative experiences with other faiths, the more we're going down, and the more that we just focus on the positive aspects of Buddhism, I think that's a more upward flow.
Yeah.
Do you think that the Buddhism negates those other systems?
I don't think I've read anything that the Buddha's written about any other systems other than the other teachers he was talking with, and he would debate in his sutras. He would debate other teachers, but I never read about him encountering into the other faiths outside of those different teachers that were traveling around India at the same time he was teaching. So it seems like he was mainly dialoguing with Hindu background teachers. It's hard to say, other than that.
I think the Buddha does refute any religion. The Buddha does refute any religion with the creator God, because I know there's the parable of Vedic preachers or Hindus believed in Brahma who created everything. But there's a sutra where Lord Buddha talks about how Brahma was deluded into thinking he was the creator when, he actually was not the creator. So in my opinion, Buddhism would refute any kind of faith rooted in creationism. But I could be wrong.
Well,
One thing about what Bob was saying, if I may say, the Buddha, they say there was these 6 other teachers at the Buddha's time. They kind of fill in for a lot of the basic philosophical views that are optional. Like there's idealism, there's materialism, there's nihilism, there's monism, there's monotheism, and then he kind of debates them on those terms. So even though the Abrahamic faiths are not from India, they're still represented somewhat by the monotheists of India with certain points of view.
Okay. William would like to add something.
Yeah, just so you know, and you're really set on the situation, Buddha never mentioned God and never talked about it. So it leaves Buddhism open to all religions, to all nationalities, to people, all types of people. and he never talked about God. So I I love you, and that's who really cares whether there's 1,000 or 12 angels dancing on the pinhead.
That's kind of my feeling as well in terms of what I'm not sure the gentleman's name actually who's speaking.
That was William, yes.
William was saying. I guess I don't really get the point of all of this, of like speculating about all of this, and is this God like this, or this God, or this religion, or quantum mechanic. I don't know what. I guess I'm kind of losing the thread of like the why behind this, to be honest.
Well, I look at it because it's there. And we to investigate the sutras is the closest thing that we can get to the actual hearing the actual voice, being in the presence of one who is Buddha. And there are many masters who have come who are Buddha, emanations of Buddha, or are Buddha. We have that nature within ourselves. But even though we may have all the qualities of being Buddha, we're still a human being, and our brain is still doing what it does. And the brain thinks. That's what it does. And all these disparate things come up and so on. And so as a Buddha, Buddha has a way of being able to not involve itself. And it does that through having investigated all this and being able to say, oh, well, this is that, this is what the omniscience is, the all-knowingness. I know what this is. I don't need to pay attention to that. Oh, I know what this is, and I'm hungry, and I need to pay attention to that. There's a practical aspect to it. So I think that there is a practicality to being able to recognize yourself as a living Buddha. At what point do we recognize ourselves as a living Buddha? And how do we process all these disparate thoughts that we have going around our brain? That's why I think it's important. Does the Buddha just sit there with absolutely no thought at all? Well, maybe in its purest sense and in another astral level or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. But I know as a human being that you can attain Buddha and have this happen at the same time. This life, you can attain enlightenment in this awakening in this lifetime. How do we do that?
I saw a guy on the internet last night that said he's an arhat. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, it's a question of what, for how long, for what moment is in arhat? And we can question all of that. Or do we just ignore it all?
I think the conversation kind of started with us looking at the text and about the gods, being present in the text. So I think it's good for us to make sure that we're all on the same page, or as far as sharing what we think that's meant by these idea of gods and what was meant when the scripture was written. What is the Buddhist perspective on who these gods are versus our Christian perspective, and how those, by talking about our Christian perspectives, then this gives us a sense of, and distinguishing them from the Buddhist perspective, then we can better understand, what's being communicated in the sutras. I think that's the point I get from the discussion.
And can we see that there's layers that are talking about the same thing with different language, different vocabulary, at different levels? It's all a point of view.
Yeah.
I think
Definitely.
what you both
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Debbie wanted to say something.
I think what you both just said tied it back in a nice little bow. What Buddha was after was the truth. It was reality. It was how this really worked. He looked out and he saw suffering. And he was raised in a tradition, a philosophical and religious tradition that wasn't addressing it, this suffering. And he saw it's completely all pervasive. Even when you don't realize you're suffering, you're suffering. All right, so that was his motivation. And he wanted to find the truth. He wanted to figure out how this all worked, because you can't transcend something or see through it unless you understand it. So first he was looking for the truth. So that's my personal guidepost. I know I'm deluded about a lot of things, but you know, that's where I'm headed, to what's really happening. And that's why I always talk about multiverses and stuff like this, because it's like, that's real, right? Like, we see these things and they are clues. The physical universe, our minds, our brains, our interactions, they're all clues as to how everything works. Everything, everybody, forever, past, present, future, it's all there. And one of the most powerful things he let us know is that we are humans and we are very flawed, but we can use meditation, compassion, logic, reason, discussion, and we can figure it out. That's what he was saying. It's possible. And you just said that, Lance. It's possible to gain enlightenment in a single lifetime. That was the gift. Try and figure out what's really going on. Approach it from every angle. And then remember that you can do it. And then, of course, remember the only motivation that is going to work is bodhicitta. And that has to come from this insane compassion that you feel for everyone and everything. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Very good.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I think we need to draw to a close. I think that the way to progress along with this investigation, the study of the sutras, I mean, it's huge. How do we do this? And I haven't been quite sure about how to do it, how to lead this, and I'm willing to change and move in whatever direction we want to go. And so with that, I would hope that everybody would start reading this, either from the beginning, one page at a time to the next page, or maybe you just open it up to a particular page, wherever you want, and find something that resonates with you that you would either like to have a discussion about, something you have a point of view about, something you don't is a mystery to you and you want to understand it better. So I think if we all look at it from that point of view, we may not get to everybody every 2-hour session, but if we can say, okay, who would like to talk about something that you read here in the sutra? What page is it on? And let's read it and let's have a conversation about it. I think is a good way. My thing tonight was, let's define God. Let's define Buddha and see where it goes. We all have a concept of what we think God is, and we all have a concept of what we think Buddha is. So this book the sutras are filled with those kinds of concepts that the Buddha is actually cutting through. The Dharma cuts through. So let's show how that works. Let's make that happen. And we don't do it by just sticking, forgive me, by just turning our back on it and saying, I'm not going to do it. It comes from the logic that Debbie was just talking about going through and then being able to say, oh, well, this is that. I don't have to worry about it anymore. So I hope that makes some sense. If you have another suggestion, I'd love to hear about it, and we'll incorporate it in whatever way we can. Does that make sense?
Lance, my daughter was watching one of our YouTubes and she had something very nice to say about you, Lance. You know what she said? She said, I love how he doesn't criticize other religions. I love how supportive he is of other religions. And so, Lance, you and Kunga, despite my very dualistic criticism of Yahweh, I think you guys are right on in terms of enlightenment. So,
Well, thank you very much. I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Taoist, I'm all those things.
Yeah, I think I like this approach. I would very interested to hear what other people may say about their thoughts and what they perspective they come across, or maybe like
Yes.
want to hear others.
Thank you. All right. So then we'll do our dedication. So we go back to our prayer book and we'll do the dedication by Lord Jigden Sumgun because I think it's so complete. It's so comprehensive. So on page 36 of the daily prayer book, the dedication prayer by Lord Jigden Sumgun. Tashi, would you recite this for us and we can follow you, please?
Yes. Glorious, holy, venerable, precious, kind, root and lineage lamas, divine assembly of yadams and assemblies of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Yogins, Yoginis, and Dakinis dwelling in the 10 directions, please hear my prayer. May the virtues collected in the 3 times by myself and all sentient beings in samsara and nirvana, and the innate root of virtue, not result in the 8 worldly concerns, the 4 causes of samsara, or rebirth as a Shravaka or Prateka Buddha. May all mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me and mine, obstructors who harm, misleading Mars and the hordes of demons, experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may I benefit all beings through my body, speech, and mind. May the afflictions of desire, hatred, ignorance, arrogance, and jealousy not arise in my mind. May attachment to fame, reputation, wealth, honor, or concern for this life not arise for even a moment. May my mind stream be moistened by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, and through that may I become a spiritual master with good qualities equal to the infinity of space. May I gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra in this very life. May the torments of suffering not arise even at the time of my death. May I not die with negative thoughts. May I not die confused by wrong view. May I not experience an untimely death. May I die joyfully and happily in the great luminosity of the mind as such, and the pervading clarity of Dharmata. May I in any case gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra at the time of death or in the bardo.
Om. Ah. Om. Om. Ah. Om. Om. Ah. Om. May my body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you very much. Sincerely, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lance. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.